The last module of our Implementing an Azure Data Solution course is going into monitoring and troubleshooting around data processing and data storage. Now, the interesting thing about this is that if you look at it from an exam perspective, there is not a very strong emphasis on the exam because we do believe a lot of these aspects do fall within the data management category, but it's important enough to actually click down and drill down into some of those details.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole point of the courses is not just to be purely exam focused, right? It's about building up skills throughout the modules that enables those students to meet everything that we discussed on the MCT briefs, right? Those hidden slides that appear on every module, and please don't forget those because hopefully they'll be useful to you. But with monitoring and troubleshooting data storage and processing, we do have 4 objectives. We start off with lesson 1, which is just a general overview of monitoring capabilities. Again, some of this touch on Azure fundamentals. So we do have that crossover. And in lesson 2 and lesson 3, we do very specifically look in lesson 2, troubleshooting common data storage issues. We use the word common, right? Because there can be all sorts of issues that exist. We just can't simply cover all of them. And it's the same with data processing issues as well in lesson 3. And then lesson 4 is finally looking at, managing disaster recovery and what options are available to you there across the range of data platforms.
Which is primarily more like what options are available versus actually going to manage these, right?
Yeah, I mean, from an exam perspective, that's what you're looking. I think in the lab we get them doing some disaster recovery because we want them to get hands-on with it. But yeah.
Okay, so let's have a look.
Yeah, so lesson 1, general Azure monitoring capabilities. We've basically got 3 objectives here. Azure Monitor, monitoring the network. Some of this often overlooked, but I do think you should use is diagnose and solve problems, which is a very specific area in all the individual data platforms. So with Azure Monitor, we've got the ability to look at metric data that is quantifiable information that is collected over time. So you can look at the behavior of a system over time. Log data, basically, this was previously done with log analytics. That's now built into Azure Monitor in the Azure portal, so you can look at that. And of course, alerts. So you can set up alerts to notify you of critical conditions. Your stuff that, as SQL Server professionals, you would have been, very familiar with doing this kind of stuff just with different tools in SQL Server. Monitoring the network, because at the end of the day, we are connecting up to a data center. So we'll look at network performance monitor to help you diagnose any reachability issues of networks. But also with some areas, you might have application gateway analytics. So you may want to use them to help you monitor client server errors between a client application.
Well, let's emphasize, this is primarily within the context of Azure and within the Azure Monitor capabilities.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you know yourself, Dan, this could be a full course in its own right. We've got to kind of pick our topics very carefully to put across what we need them to learn, but without doing a full-blown course on it. Diagnose and solve issues, which I added in because it's really useful, right? Cosmos DB, again, is a really good example of where they've managed to, capture a lot of solutions to common problems. So don't be afraid to call out that a lot of the content in this material has come from these because they are in direct response to customer problems. The thing to note about this area is that it also has the resource health as well.
And look at these solutions to common problems, right?
Yeah,
that
exactly.
Indicate some of these common problems and then how to go
and fix
take
them.
action upon.
Exactly.
That's the power of AI really built into the platform.
Troubleshoot common data storage issues. So we're looking at some common examples that we face. Our Premier Field engineers have been facing in the field, right? So connectivity issues is usually the common one. Performance issues is second, and then occasionally you'll get actual storage issues itself. The good news is because it's in Azure, it might not necessarily be your fault. So we'll show you how you can deal with them.
And a lot of these topics also sit within the context of customer support teams. And those customer support teams, content creation now also falls within our content creation area. So there's some really good synergy around that as well.
Cool. So connectivity issues. First of all, if you're unable to connect, now of course we assume you've done all the basic checks, like someone hasn't pulled your network cable out, right? But what we're doing is for common connectivity issues, check for connectivity,
Yep.
Check for authentication failovers. From a Cosmos DB perspective, we've noticed there is a specific behavior with MongoDB
Yep.
API, which you need to be aware of. And then SQL database failover as well. In the situation that you've got a failover there, sometimes you can get error code 40613 and just making you aware that that issue can occur when there is a failover happening. Beyond connectivity issues, there are performance issues that vary across the various things. So with Cosmos DB, well, with all of them really, particularly SQL DB, SQL Data Warehouse, Cosmos DB, usually it's because you've picked the wrong resource utilization. You're not sizing it correctly, right? So request units in Cosmos DB. Secondly, it's your partitioning strategy. Thirdly, if it's SQL Data Warehouse, it's your distribution on your tables.
Exactly.
So basically use the knowledge from the previous modules to talk about some of the performance issues that you get here. And storage issues, consistency. Particular issue with Cosmos DB, SQL Data Warehouse and SQL Database is your consistency levels. We cover consistency levels particularly in Cosmos DB because it's new.
That's correct.
But although we don't call it out explicitly in SQL Database, it is still there because we just expect you to know that if you're a SQL server.
Plus within SQL databases, then also important to understand if you have geo-replication set up on a read-only database and so on. Really understand those concepts as well.
Exactly. Data corruption, right? You need to have an appropriate disaster recovery strategy. We don't go into specifics here because we have a separate lesson on disaster recovery. We go through the review questions, and then lesson 3 is troubleshooting common data processing issues. So we're talking about troubleshooting streaming data, batch data loads, and of course any issues that you could potentially have with Data Factory. Again, common issues, right? We haven't covered everything. So, streaming data, job input, job output. Always click on the test connection button first and foremostly. Beyond that, most of the errors is usually to do with malformed data, i.e. the structure of your input data is not really matching what is expected. Basically, check with the job output, check the query first.
And that's also where connectivity testing and so on.
Which is why we cover the connectivity first. You do those basic checks, right? And with job query, it's where just check the query first. Sometimes the query isn't, what you expect, and there may be no mistakes in the code at all. It's just pulling something back that's not expected. Batch data loads, Azure, Blob, and Data Lake Store. So ruling out that we've already established that there's no network errors. Sometimes you can get timeouts or throttling errors, which is a symptom of the availability of your storage accounts.
Makes sense.
SQL Data Warehouse, make sure you're leveraging Polybase, that's the big thing. Make sure you're using create table select statements for utilising Polybase. Break down any ingestion into Polybase into text files. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, that's a big problem. And look at your data warehouse units that you're doing there. Cosmos DB, make sure you've got enough request units, review your partitioning strategy, check for client connection string issues, which goes back to the MongoDB API earlier.
And those are the things as a trainer that you really want to point out there.
And it's stuff particularly if you're more experienced at teaching these kind of SQL courses, because I mean, when I say that, we used to have SQL courses that did have monitoring and troubleshooting courses. You can leverage your experience from those courses into here as well. SQL database, sure enough, check your DTUs, review the database. Would it benefit from elastic pools? That's a very specific configuration option. Or, we just call out the fact that within SQL database itself, there's a whole range of tools that you can use that quite frankly could come under data management.
Absolutely, and that goes into actual query performance, putting written queries. No index usage, those kind of things.
And that's when we stopped. But top headline, it's first pragmatic to make a holistic check of Azure. Just check the Azure availability on the website as well. Occasionally, it's not you. Occasionally, we have some issues as well.
Okay.
And then troubleshooting Azure Data Factory. There is a monitoring capability within Azure Data Factory that you've probably called out during the Azure Data Factory lab. It's calling it out here as well. And you've got the ability to review the activity runs and the trigger runs.
Makes sense.
Okay. Managing disaster recovery. Data redundancy, disaster recovery. With data redundancy, we're looking at that across the various data
Yeah.
platforms that we've covered.
It goes
So-
into storage, backup,
Exactly.
geo-replication.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Azure Blob and Data Lake Store, you've got locally redundant storage, zone redundant storage, geo redundant storage, read access geo redundant storage. SQL Data Warehouse geo backups with a restore point objective for a geo restore being 24 hours. Azure Cosmos DB being a globally distributed data service, you've probably got a strategy that distributes that data anyway, to the point that you're not just replicating data to make it faster for your users to access, but you also may be replicating it for disaster recovery purposes as well. And for SQL database, the redundancy is also built into there, but you could add your own redundancy in there as well. Disaster recovery supports account failover for geo-redundant storage in Azure Blob and Data Lake Store. For SQL Data Warehouse, remember that a geo backup is done once per day, but you also have a feature called Data Warehouse Snapshots as well that you can use. Cosmos DB, backup is taken every 4 hours, but only the last 2 are kept, which means your RPO is every 8 hours. And then your SQL database creates a backup that's kept between 7 and 35 days and uses the read access geo-redundant storage to make sure that you can access that.
And that's based on the service tier you pick.
Exactly, exactly. Review questions, and then basically what this lab is doing is it's just exploring those objectives, and there are contrived data storage errors in there that you can do. Okay. Lab scenario reinforces is a further deep dive on what's on the case study, and then as usual you have the open-ended lab review questions to have a discussion with the group. Finally, go through the module summary, and again you've got Laura Rebelka again, where she goes through Azure Monitor very specifically with Rahul Bagario, who's working in that team.
Correct.
And that really that completes the final module of your course.
Okay, perfect. So with that, we actually wrapped up the last module of the course. We're pretty sure that there are going to be follow-on questions that we're exploring with our Microsoft Certified Trainer Lead on how we're going to be organizing town halls whatsoever in order to get better feedback from you, from our learning partners. I cannot express on how great it is to work with Chris and the rest of my team building content in the area of data and AI, because both of us have been Microsoft certified trainers on that part for quite a bit. So I really look forward to additional feedback coming from you as a trainer, feedback that will continue to update our curriculum, enhance it, add additional learning paths on Learn in order for you to better prep, or as technology evolves, the sustained engineering on something that is cloud related, right, Chris, is really at times challenging. That's the advantage and disadvantage of cloud and new cloud data services coming. Anything you want to add for the audience?
The only thing I would add is, as Azure technical trainers and Microsoft certified trainers, you probably know where I am. If not, look me up, get in touch with me, and I am open to any feedback you can offer. I hope this has been useful for you, and keep pushing us on creating better products. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and really appreciate it. Thank you.